Cybersecurity predictions for 2024. It's December 12th, 2023. I'm Scott Schlee, and you're listening to Skyhigh Security CloudCast.
Security is a data protection problem, and it's difficult to protect data that's everywhere. Throughout the fabric of devices, the web, cloud applications, infrastructure, and among users. This creates security gaps. That's why we are here. Learn what it takes to defend your data. Welcome to CloudCast.
Welcome to a special two-part episode of CloudCast. We'll be reflecting on key trends and challenges that shaped 2023, and then turn our gaze toward the future to explore the latest technologies, emerging threats, and innovative strategies that will define the year ahead. Joining me today is Rodman Ramezanian, Global Cloud Threat Lead for Skyhigh Security. How are you today, Rodman?
I'm very well, thank you, Scott. Thanks so much for having me. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm very good, thank you. And you're coming from, am I pronouncing this right, Canberra, Australia?
Canberra. Yeah,
Canberra.
Not a bad first attempt, actually. Trust
I
me,
put a little too much emphasis on those words.
Indeed. Oh, believe me, I've heard it all. It's not. We've got our interesting selection of words over here, down under in Australia. So no, look, I've heard all sorts of pronunciations, but it is Canberra.
Canberra. Okay, very good. Yeah. Well, I am definitely going to have to come back to Australia. I've only been one time to Sydney, and I loved it. It was an amazing trip, and I'd love to see more of your beautiful country.
Nice. Yeah, I'm actually originally from Sydney, and I definitely can appreciate your love for Sydney. It's a beautiful place. I mean, Canberra, I've been here for almost 8 years now, but I do obviously go back to Sydney time to time to see family or for work reasons, and it's always such a great place to be.
How is it size-wise to Sydney?
Oh, it's much, much, much smaller. I mean, in population, in just the size of the city, in just infrastructure, and even just the pace of life. It is drastically slower and I guess a bit more laid back, you could say. So the reason we have you here today is we wanted to discuss 2024 and the some of your predictions for cybersecurity trends in 2024. But before we get into that, did you make any predictions for 2023? I did. I had a number of predictions, actually. It was really all around, I guess, hybrid workforces and how we're going to see that trend continuing at, surging rates. And, of course, we've all seen how, I guess since COVID and that what most people would label as the new standard, it's really the norm now. I mean, depending on what vertical you work in, obviously, and the nature of your business, the essence of working from wherever you are, or when you're on the go, when you're accessing data from your phones and tablets and laptops and so on, that really has become the baseline sort of standard now. We don't really refer to it as the new norm because it's just become so standardized in our day-to-day lives.
And you think that's going to continue? So the standard working from home, remote work, all that is pretty well here to stay.
Yeah, I would say so. I think the reality is, what we've collectively as a society learnt from the pandemic, among many things, obviously, was that we can, remain quite functional and productive and collaborative in those sort of hybrid scenarios where we can't all be face-to-face in a physical office. And so I think that hybrid workforce, I guess, element is going to keep on continuing at really high rates because we've been able to demonstrate how we can still get the job done. But of course comes a lot of the security considerations with, if you are using BYOD devices that belong to yourself, if you are using devices from unknown locations and all sorts of services, there's always going to be that consideration on how you're securing access, how you're protecting data, and all that good stuff.
So in 2023, in the news, saw quite a lot of attacks. Very frequently, you would turn on the news or just what I like to call doom scrolling from time to time, and you just see attack after attack after attack, ransomware, data loss. It just was a barrage of incidents. What, in your opinion, were some of the most notable incidents or attacks that stood out in 2023?
I think, look, I'll be a little bit biased in having the Australian perspective, but I mean, it almost does apply globally too. We had our fair share of telecommunications hacks. We had healthcare hacks. All of which, or both of which, would comprise critical infrastructure. What's classified as critical these days. So we've had high-profile data breaches. We've had obviously privacy concerns that have made the news. So I think a combination of, I guess these incidents, and like some of it involved ransomware, some of it involved leaks or misconfigurations. I think collectively what these have all done is just, I guess at a board level, they have helped amplify the conversation of security. It's no longer a case of, I guess, security professionals having to be the loudest one in the room. I think now it's well and truly a conversation at a board level. And we've seen it where governments around the world have been trying to, step in and introduce regulations. Again, here in Australia, we've had our federal government step in and saying that they forbid enterprises and organizations from making ransomware payments. Now, of course, that's been met.
Wow.
Yeah.
I did not know that. Correct. Forbid.
Yeah. So they've actually forbid it, and of course, that's been met with some differing opinions and views and perspectives, and some are saying, well, it really depends on the scenario and the severity and gravity of the situation. Others say, well, we shouldn't take a blanket approach. Some say, well, that's the right approach because we are effectively fueling that market, that business model of ransomware. And they've also introduced penalties, really large penalties for organizations who fail to perform their due diligence and invest in security to a sufficient level. I mean, upwards of $50 million penalties issued to organizations who fail to protect their customer and stakeholder data. So, of course, like around the world, we've seen much of that as well. I mean, I think we've seen quite a lot more literature coming out from the governments and the industry bodies regarding what the ramifications are for organizations who just aren't doing enough to protect data.
Okay, so something that you had mentioned, you had brought up in one of your blog posts was about the President Biden's executive order on AI, which got me to thinking. We'll circle back into the executive order, but as I was looking into that a little bit more, I was not aware that when it comes to corporate breaches in the States, in the United States, companies have to report their breaches at the state level. And so there's no cohesive federal reporting response that's kind of uniformed. It's at the state level. So in essence, you have 50 different state required reports for any kind of breach. Do you feel like the U.S. should adopt more of that federal level reporting, if that makes sense?
No, it does. I think you're absolutely right. I think there does need to be standardization, and I guess taking a more uniform approach. I think, look, for U.S. federal departments, we do have to acknowledge that some government departments are undoubtedly very large. Their systems and infrastructures have grown and changed a lot over the years, again, with the pandemic being one big catalyst for that change. And I think what it boils down to is that they have old systems and lots of things to fix. They're now obliged to switch to and adopt architectural principles and processes to, for example, support a zero trust framework. And that's been, gathering quite a lot of buzz as well. It's a huge job because they're needing to fundamentally evolve everything from their people and their culture, processes, technology, while keeping things running smoothly, as citizens would expect. But I'd also say that, with the right strategies in place, and I think from a top-down approach, to your point, from a federal level, it can, I guess that push can serve as such an important catalyst and a driver for, collectively stronger cyber postures and resilience, and that's been needed for so long, as I'm sure you would agree with. And, in the past year, there've been so many new laws about privacy and security, both at the state and federal levels in the US. We've seen, as you said, individual states update rules about data breach reporting. They've made changes to broader privacy laws. At the national level, I was reading that the SEC made big changes for public companies, and I was reading there are more rules being worked on in other areas too. As you said, failure to comply with the mandatory breach reporting regimes, arguably, I would say, the canary in the coal mine for regulatory compliance. And I touched on earlier, here in Australia, it's been such a huge talking point in the context of larger organizations falling victim to attacks, at least over the past 12 months. And I think that when you consider the growing concerns and those louder conversations being had publicly, about internet privacy and security as a whole, I think it's likely that there will be more legislation on things like, online activities as a whole. And as you said, that'll ultimately impact, how everyone uses the internet, how that impacts websites and browsers and things that we all use. So I think more is coming, and I think it would collectively be for the better.
So, as I'm hearing, you think it'll be a good thing, and I do to a degree think that as well, but I'm wondering, are governments on the whole going to be in a consistent state of playing catch up?
Right. I would agree with that. I mean, you mentioned the word evolving. I mean, the challenge always is that these threats keep evolving, as you said. The narratives they pursue, like the end goal, the level of reach that they can enjoy with more and more people on their platforms they're influencing. I think that we're collectively getting smarter about it because of, again, the awareness in this domain nowadays. And I think the acknowledgement is becoming stronger that there are legitimate risks to be aware of. But it is absolutely evolving. And like in the same, I guess, breath that regulations are evolving, the threats are evolving, and we are playing catch up. But I mean, the old adage of, security should be a journey, not a destination. I mean, the reality is we're going to have to keep on evolving. And, we talk about playing catch up, right? I mean, security defenders, we are at a disadvantage. I mean, attackers have an asymmetric advantage because if you think about it, they need to find just one loophole, one vulnerability, one backdoor or an exploit to, carry out successfully to do what they need to do, depending on what it is they're trying to achieve. Whereas for us as defenders of our networks and organizations, we need to protect so many verticals and so many threat vectors, and if we get it wrong in one place, that could be the defining moment. So I think we are always going to have to play, maybe not always play catch up, but I think we are always going to have to keep on shifting and reprioritizing and redeveloping and morphing and evolving with these things, because it's never going to be a static state of play.
And the bad actors that you were just talking about, they don't have any ethical standards that they've got to adhere to. And that makes a big difference.
Absolutely. And, we talk about, of course, AI is, the buzz right now, but these systems we all use on a day-to-day basis for work, for leisure and communication, collaboration, and so on. Like, if you're a technology provider, if you're somebody who writes software, there's no Hippocratic oath where you need to, create software that's going to serve sort of mankind and never be used nefariously. I mean, the reality is, if attackers see an angle where they can exploit and manipulate, they're going to do it. And we're seeing that in almost everything, that they're finding ways to influence and sort of further their agendas.
Along that AI line, is that what we can expect more organizations to leverage AI and machine learning to automate their instant responses, and to stay ahead of those ever-evolving threats?
I would say so. I think that as artificial intelligence integrates more and more into our daily lives, and we've seen this in many places, obviously, everything from online shopping to the music services or movie streaming services we use. You think about the last time you opened your favorite music portal and it would say, if you liked X, you may like Y. We're constantly, I guess, the beneficiaries of predictive algorithms and artificial intelligence getting smarter and learning about us. And I think the more it integrates into our lives, those cyber criminals are also prepared to harness its capabilities for their own agendas, to, I guess, further their own tradecraft. And we're seeing huge rises in deep fakes, AI-generated video and audio content that's frighteningly lifelike, as you can imagine. And they pose serious threats to industries like financial services. They can deceive systems and personnel that are meant to govern access into financial and banking platforms. So, there are all sorts of industries and verticals being impacted by this, but you're absolutely right. AI really turns things up another notch in this grand scheme of things.
And it's pretty obvious now that we can expect with AI more personalized and sophisticated social engineering attacks, especially with Chat GPT, for example. That's another buzzword right now, being so readily available.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to your point, social engineering has been and continues to be a really threatening and incredibly successful vector for attackers to leverage. And again, that's an area that AI has been extremely helpful for these threat actors to craft their phishing emails and messages where they can seem so much more legitimate with proper spelling and punctuation. They can tell convincing stories to deceive and manipulate humans, say a technical support team operating a help desk to reset a privileged account. We saw that recently with the MGM incident that happened. And I think, we talk about AI sort of changing the game, right? In the past, cyber criminals have marketplaces where they can trade exploits and toolkits and things, but their proficiency in the English language, which would sometimes sort of hurt their chances. If they can't craft a very convincing message, it might sort of hurt their chances. But now you've got things like ChatGPT, as you mentioned, where, of course, there are rudimentary, ethical filters to say, well, sorry, I can't write a phishing template for you. But if you said, hi, I'd like you to write me a message that's addressed to my work colleagues regarding a fictitious, work event, maybe a barbecue over the past week, and I'd like you to include a hyperlink to some photos. Now, you think about the effort that's involved for a threat actor to weaponize that template and just replace the hyperlink with their own phishing link. That's basically 90% of the effort done for them. So, it's just making things so much easier for them. And that's back to the point of, I guess, tipping the scales in their favor. And that means we've all got to up our game. AI is going to, like many things though, right? As technology advances, there are obviously going to be good applications and, safe uses of it, but there are also going to be nefarious uses. And, you think about our adoption of cloud. The speed of adoption that we're all, jumping on board onto cloud services and SaaS providers. By the same token, attackers are also shifting and saying, well, you know what, I don't need to host servers and command and control infrastructure now the way I used to, maybe many years ago. Now I can compromise, say, an AWS or Azure host. It's somebody else's billing system. They can host whatever servers or bits and pieces they need to help, again, make their jobs easier, make their processes cheaper and more profitable. And AI is the same thing now. We all thought AI is here to make our lives easier, and of course, for many functions and scenarios, it does really great work in fueling creativity and things like that, as we all know. But at the same time, cyber criminals also pivot and leverage it for their purposes.
Do you see organizations, at least some of them, migrating back to on-prem as opposed to cloud?
You know what? I do because I think there's been a lot of conversation about the fact that very highly regulated industries are going to keep on seeing value and remaining on-prem. I mean, they can't port everything to the cloud in one big bang approach for sensitivity of the data they handle, for classifications of certain traffic and so on. I think we're seeing more organizations voice their concerns about cloud costs, because we can't forget the costs associated with cloud computing isn't cheap. It can be significant, and so many organizations are finding that it's actually more cost effective to bring their workloads back on premises. We talked about data security and privacy. On-premises infrastructures tend to give organizations more control over their data because they're ultimately owners of that entire infrastructure and the underlying pieces that are used, and they can control their own destinies in a sense a bit more effectively. And I think also the need for more flexibility and control. Of course, it could be argued that cloud offers so much flexibility and scale and so on, which is true. But I think in the on-prem scenario, for again many industry verticals that in some cases need to have quite a lot more control over their hardware, their software, their networking controls, it does make sense. And I think we are probably going to start seeing more organizations consider either a hybrid architecture where they kind of leverage best of both worlds where that's possible, or those who are just saying, I think from a risk-based approach, from a cost approach, from a return on investment, they might be coming back on premises, yeah.
Is a zero trust approach the answer to all cybersecurity, or is it just another tool in the toolbox?
Look, I think zero trust there's been quite a lot of talk about it. Obviously, it's been quite a lot of craze. I think the adoption of zero trust is going to keep on continuing. But really, and I'm sure most security practitioners would agree, it is fundamentally based on principles that have been around for a very long time. All around, I guess the principles of least privilege. I guess challenging how we have all gotten used to, working in traditional networks where it was all around protecting the perimeter. And, once you're through the perimeter, you're effectively trusted. And so I think zero trust brings with it a lot of differences and challenges, but the reality is I think it's going to play a big part in, all organizations and their security approaches, whether that is on-prem or in the cloud.
So is it really an option to just completely shut down access to third-party CSPs, to your chat GPTs, to anything outside of their control when you're talking about either a cloud or a traditional network?
Look, I wouldn't say to shut down. I think how it challenges, to your point, CSPs and SaaS services. I think security teams are going back to the drawing board, or if they haven't, they should be, because the reality is in the cloud, there are no fixed borders. There's no clear boundary or a fixed edge like there were, back in the traditional network days. It's obviously a lot more fluid and flexible, and it makes it a lot harder to define who's inside or outside. And, you've got cloud services that are just out there accessible to the world freely. And so zero trust in the cloud means always checking who's accessing what, no matter where they are, no matter what they're using. And it keeps changing. Everything keeps changing. The cloud is always changing, and growing services can pop up or disappear in a snap. And that makes it tough to keep track of everything and ensure security measures cover all these constantly moving parts. You've got things like containers and cloud workloads that sometimes are ephemeral or are only a very quick instantiation time. So zero trust challenges that sort of way of thinking. It's not always in your own hands. Unlike traditional networks where you had more control, the cloud involves shared responsibility, as you know, between you and the cloud service provider. You're responsible for securing your own data and your settings while they manage certain aspects. But zero trust is going to mean verifying and managing security across this shared space. And, identity obviously plays a big part. And in the cloud, Zero Trust focuses a lot on checking who's trying to access stuff, and whether it's a person, a device, or an application, making sure everyone is who they say they are becomes a bigger deal. But it's not just enough to just identify who they are. You're going to have to control levels of access, to your point, to how they interact with certain CSPs or sanctioned corporate services and things of that nature.
So it's apparent that businesses are going to have to increase their cybersecurity and threat awareness and education campaigns to employees, but is that actually going to be enough?
I think it's going to be a journey. I mean, as I said, it won't be a sort of a destination where we can, organizations won't be able to get to a point in time to say we have Zero Trust. We are a Zero Trust organization. The reality is you're going to have to keep on reassessing, tightening policies, optimizing, fine-tuning, because to your point earlier, things are going to keep on evolving. Services we consume, the ways in which we collaborate and communicate together, I think the ways in which we provide access or provision certain services, they're going to keep on evolving. So I think, it's really going to be a case of reevaluating security approaches and strategies moving forward, and it's going to have to keep on staying that way, because it's not enough to say we're going to focus on Zero Trust and we'll get there and then we'll just have to sustain it. I think it's just going to keep on reshaping how we think about security at an enterprise level.
And that concludes the first part of our deep dive into predictions for the cybersecurity landscape in 2024. It's no surprise that there are just too many possibilities and predictions to fit into one episode, so the conclusion of my conversation with Rodman Ramezanian will be dropping next week, December 19th. Again, I want to thank Rodman for joining me today. You can find all of Rodman's social media links in the show notes. We hope you've enjoyed this episode and will subscribe to the podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Radio Public, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. For more information about the podcast or Skyhigh Security's cloud security solutions, please visit skyhighsecurity.com.